Hello and good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching. Hello, Joe. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi.
How is it going?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you.
Oh, very good, very good. So Joe has not been on this in this segment before, so maybe you wanna share a few words, who you are, what you're doing, and yeah, maybe start with that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Joe DePoe. Forgive me if I sound a little bit hoarse. I've had a little bit of a cold, nothing serious, nothing COVID related. But I had some training to deliver last week, and so I spent a good kind of 15 hours just talking while I had a sore throat, and it's ruined my voice a little bit.
Yeah,
But anyway, we'll be fine. I feel fine today. Um,
good.
so yeah, my name is Joe DePoe. I'm part of the field engineering team for with Neo4j in London. So I don't sound British. I'm not. I'm American by birth, but I've lived in the UK for about 14 years now, and I've been with Neo4j for about 4.5 years. So I work in the field team. I do a lot of pre-sales, but as a kind of a side thing, I love making demos. I love playing with Neo4j. I love making graphs, and so I'm pleased to be here with you today.
Cool. Cool. Welcome, Joe. Thank you for doing this, and welcome all again. If you are watching this live, let us know in chat where you're watching from, and yeah, what excites you about graphs maybe as well. Um, yeah, this segment is kind of our showcase of how much fun and how quickly you can get started with Neo4j, and especially with Neo4j AuraDB free, which is not is our obviously free offering of a database as a service cloud. Um, uh, yeah, with Neo4j. So I think that's the goal of it. I'll quickly go over what Neo4j AuraDB free is exactly and what we're gonna do today. Hi, Bench from the UK. Oh, nice for you to join today. Thanks. And then we'll dive in right away in some data sets. So let me share my screen here and obviously get rid of this one. And here we go. All right. So, what is a Neo4j AuraDB free? So it's a free version of Neo4j AuraDB, which you can. I'll post a link in chat afterwards. Which comes in a couple of tiers. So you have the free version, obviously, a professional edition and a enterprise edition. So they differ in sizing, but generally the free version offers 50,000 nodes and 170,000 relationships, which you can use in your data set. You get access to obviously Neo4j browser, but also Neo4j Bloom, which is our visualization tool. And Joe hinted at it in our little pre-stream talk that we will indeed be showing Bloom today. So you see that as well. It's going to be free forever. So that's, I think, the major difference between what used to be, or Sandbox still is available, but the Sandbox is terminating automatically after 3 or 7 days, depending if you prolong it or not. This is staying with you forever, so you don't have to worry about the data being gone or the your instance being deleted. Get to that landing page. I'll post a link in chat afterwards, so that's going to be easier for you. But yeah, let's get going today. This week's topic is Pokemon, so I'm very excited about that. I'm you might have seen the stream I did about a year ago on video games and Steam. So I am obviously playing video games, but I must admit, in this here now stream, I admit I never played a Pokemon game. I watched the animes or the cartoons kind of in, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s or something. But I never I never watched I never played a Pokemon game. So I'm not an expert on the topic, but that doesn't matter, I guess. Joe is the expert here.
You'll learn a lot. You'll
Hello,
learn a
yeah,
lot about Pokemon in the
yeah,
next hour.
yeah.
Yeah, so I've been into Pokemon. I'm not a Pokemon fanatic, but I got into Pokemon around the same time that you mentioned, Alex, like in the late '90s. I'm the oldest of all my siblings, and my youngest brother is about 20 years younger than me, thereabouts. And so when he was a young boy, he was really into Pokemon, and it was a good way for us to bond. So I like to play video games as well. I like to play board games, and so it was no big leap for me to start collecting Pokemon cards and playing Pokemon on my Game Boys and stuff like that. So that's how I got into it, was as a way to kind of bond with my younger brother. And he would come visit me when I lived in New York City. He would come stay with me, and we would go to the Pokemon Center there, and we would play Pokemon together. And it was just good fun. And so I've kind of stayed with it through the years, I guess. And so a while ago, I wrote a series of blog posts. Here at Neo4j, we like to say graphs are everywhere. And so I wanted
Yes.
to take that idea and kind of run with it, right? And like, okay, where are graphs really? So I did a series of blog posts. Like I wrote about, I made a graph of the routes that I walk my dog in the morning. I made a graph of like RuPaul's Drag Race. Just like anything I could think of. Okay, we can graph that. No
Yeah.
worries, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I made this Pokemon graph, which is what I want to share with you today. I guess let's dive in and have a look.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, but it's while you get set up, I think it's always astonishing when you think about what can be made into a graph, or what actually is a graph. Why we don't think about it, and then if you just spend a little time thinking of it, and then you realize almost immediately that this could be a graph, and that could be a graph. And here, like you say, I mean, walking your dog around is probably the comes back to the root of all of graph with Euler's seven bridges of Königsberg problem. But still, I mean, everything's connected, especially nowadays, and it makes so much sense to think of this in this way. So yeah, it's it's pretty obvious. Uh,
Absolutely. And it was a really fun exercise writing that series of blog posts.
yeah, yeah.
It's I got a lot of really interesting feedback from it as well.
Hmm.
People would say to me, well, like colleagues would say to me, like, my kids understand what I do now because you wrote this blog post about it.
Yeah,
Uh, you
yeah.
know, people will message me and say, "Oh, I understand graphs now because I saw this like RuPaul's Drag Race graph." So it was kind of a really interesting way of not just me having a bit of fun and extolling the virtues of Neo4j, but putting graphs into a context that a lot of people would understand, right? Whereas
Yeah.
normally, kind of in my
And
day job, I work with banks or
exactly.
government agencies or whatever.
Yeah. So less Pokemon, more financial stuff. But obviously, yes, I think that's that's what I mean. Obviously, you could spin this around, right? I mean, I know that these at least the trading card games of Pokemon can be worth considerable money. So I guess it's coming down to it again. But
Fair enough.
yeah, but yeah, I think you need a tangible example, and then once you see it, it cannot be unseen. So kind of like this is the graph baseline, I think.
Absolutely. Cool. So what I have here is this is the Neo4j browser. We talked about Bloom a little bit earlier, and I can show some examples in Bloom, but for right now, I'm going to start with the Neo4j browser. This is a developer-focused interface that ships with every version of Neo4j and is available by default with Aura free or DB free. Right now, what we're looking at is the schema, for lack of a better word, or the metagraph, I might call it. This describes how the data in my graph is connected, not necessarily how it has to be. It's not like a schema you might be used to in another type of database where you're enforcing that the data has to be a certain way. Instead, this just describes how my data is connected. You can see here in pink we have Pokemon, which kind of is the center of this particular data set. Pokemon can evolve into other Pokemon. Pokemon come from a particular generation, so that there's been decades of Pokemon now, and so we classify Pokemon by the generation of games or whatever that they were introduced in. Pokemon can have an ability. These are like special abilities that Pokemon have, right? And it's kind of dependent on the Pokemon itself and its type. Which I guess brings me on to type here. So Pokemon can be of a certain type or have more than one type. and that influences what moves they can learn and what their vulnerabilities are. So this is how we start understanding how, we'll look at like a team of Pokemon or a collection of Pokemon that you might be playing with and what they're weak against and how you can optimize a team to go up against different enemies or different rivals. Pokemon can also know moves, so these are different from abilities. Abilities are like these super moves, very powerful attacks, or sometimes they can heal you or whatever, right? They don't just have to be an attack. Moves are kind of more basic attacks that you would use in step-by-step in combat. And then I've shown, so I built this data set when I was playing Pokemon Sword and Shield. There's new, kind of very new Pokemon games that have just come out, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which I haven't played yet. They're on my to-do list once I beat Metroid and Halo. But this data set actually covers those as
pile of
well.
shame.
Sorry?
Do you have a pile of shame?
I do. It's a massive pile of shame. Oh my goodness. Like if I wasn't so addicted to Animal Crossing, I could get through that pile of shame so much faster. But I haven't yet come on to graphing Animal Crossing. Like that will be an undertaking, but I'll find a way. So I built this team in Sword and Shield, and I kind of graphed what the team looked like at the time, what moves I had taught them, and what abilities they had, so we can drill into more specific examples rather than just looking at like generic sets of Pokemon. For Pokemon and their type, we have this against relationship that shows basically the effectiveness of moves of a particular type against a Pokemon, and this can range from like being immune all the way up to like very vulnerable too. And so on this against relationship, there's basically a modifier, like a float, that says an attack of this type against this Pokemon is modified by this number, right? So if you were highly very resistant to, you might just get a quarter of the damage, whereas if you're very vulnerable to a particular attack, it could be like a modifier of 4. And so just to make it easier to visualize in this interface, I broke out each one of those to say a particular Pokemon is immune to a particular type or very resistant to or whatever. So this is our data model. You can see it's over here on the left, we see some details about the counts in our graph. So we can see that there's only just under 2,000 nodes in this graph and just under 62,000 relationships among them. So this is a pretty small graph in Neo4j terms, but it fits very comfortably into an Aura-free, AuraDB free instance. And I think this data set I just cobbled together from I found some data on Kaggle, and like someone had published some of this as CSVs in GitHub, and then I think I also scraped some information from the Pokemon database, which you can see here, which is like a really extensive source of data about all things Pokemon. So that's our data set. There's a number of properties here that we'll kind of explore as we go through some examples. But does that make sense, Alex? Are you already becoming enlightened about Pokemon?
Yeah, I think that does make sense. I think that is a good start. I think it's particularly I could imagine knowing which, I mean, obviously, I guess a pro knows this by heart, but like for myself, I don't know much about these different types. So I guess it could be interesting to know, okay, which Pokemon is good against which other Pokemon. Yeah.
Exactly. And later on, I have an example where we'll kind of analyze my team and see what its weaknesses are. And then, as I wrote in the blog post, we can see what the weak spots of my team are, because it's not really a very diverse, well-balanced team, at least not at the point that I took this snapshot. And then how, maybe how we can analyze filling that gap. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things you could do. I could even see building a recommendation engine on top of this, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm going up against this boss, and so I need to bring these Pokemon with these moves.
Yeah.
Cool. So Before we switch over to Bloom, we can just take a look at some basic queries here. So this is the Cypher for matching a particular Pokemon. So this was the Pokemon that I chose as my starter. His name is Grookey. We can just get some basic information about Grookey. So what generation is Grookey from? What type evolves from? Can have these sorts of things. So we're matching particular relationships and just exploring a little bit around this particular Pokemon. So we can see here, this is Grookey. Wacky evolves from Grookey. So in the next, Grookey's kind of the first, most basic form of the Pokemon, and then when it reaches a certain level and certain criteria are met, Grookey will evolve, and then it can even evolve beyond that, right? Perhaps. So Grookey can have these two abilities, Grassy Surge and Overgrow. Grookey is a grass Pokemon. It's from Generation 8, so a very recent addition to the Pokedex. So yeah, that's some basic information about Grookey, right? And this is just to give us a little bit of flavor for Cypher, if you're not familiar with Cypher, before we switch over to Bloom, because Bloom is will take us away from Cypher and make it a little easier to explore the data without having to know the query language necessarily. We can explore a little bit more about Grookey's vulnerabilities and strengths. So here in orange are all the different types of attacks there might be, different moves there might be. There's Grookey.
This is how it looks like, by the way.
Good call.
Just in case anybody was wondering. So this is Grookey.
You can see Grookey's very cute. That's why I chose Grookey as my starter Pokemon. So here's all the different types of moves that there can be, right? So these are also types of Pokemon, but Pokemon have types of moves, and that defines their strengths or weaknesses against them, right? So, for example, because Grookey is a grass Pokemon, we can see that because Grookey has the type of grass. If we look at grass moves against Grookey, there's a modifier of 0.5, so he's resistant to grass moves, right? So if you had a grass move against Grookey and say it was going to do 10 damage, that he would only take 5, right? So this is how we work out the strengths and weaknesses and how we can understand which moves would be more or less effective against Grookey. Or conversely, if Grookey was going into battle, we would want to put Grookey into battle against Pokemon who would probably use moves that that Grookey was resistant to, right? So we have normal vulnerability against Dragon. He's weak against Poison. Right? So this is how we can start to understand how we would maybe mix Grookey into a team, or what types of battles they would be most effective in. And then we can take a look at all the available moves for Grookey. So again, we're starting by matching Grookey. We're following the can-no relationship out to moves, and then we want to understand the types of those moves. I'll expand this out because it's a little bit a little crowded. So again, here's Grookey in blue. We have all the different moves that Grookey can learn. And then we have the types of all of those moves. So normally, because Grookey is a grass Pokemon, you would expect they would know grass moves. And then most Pokemon can also learn a number of normal moves, which are kind of unclassified, right?
When you say moves, it's kind of like a skill?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, because often they would be an attack, but not always. Like for example, rest is not an attack. It's a heal. It's a buff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So these would then be in damage. You would kind of like in battle. You would choose what kind of skill move you wanna execute, and then he's doing it against the opposite Pokemon. Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is the full range of moves that Grookey can know. not always from the get-go. Like some of these, you need to have a particular item that will teach you a move, or maybe other conditions need to be met before Grookey can learn these moves. But a Pokemon, as you put a Pokemon into your team, like an instance of a Pokemon that's actually yours in your team and you can name and you own, they can only know 4 moves at a time. So you have to choose which 4 you're gonna use for them, right? Out of this whole list, and so that's where some of the team building aspects come in, right?
Yeah.
It would make sense for Grookey to know mostly grass moves because that's their category, but you might want to throw in some moves from another type so that he can your Grookey can be more effective against various types of Pokemon. So this is really where the art and kind of
Yeah.
building a team comes in, right?
Yeah. And I guess you balance it across your other Pokemon you have in your roster, and kind of like say, okay, this skill or move is good for this Pokemon, so I can use them with only this type because I have this other one that can kind of like act more as a support character or more like a defense kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll take a look at the team that I built. A roster was a good word that you used. We'll take a look at kind of how I built that team and what they might be strong against or weak against and stuff. But yeah, that's where the fun really comes in, is collecting all the different Pokemon. And sometimes you can only get to various parts of the world when you have certain types of moves, because maybe you're going to an area where there's going to be a lot of water Pokemon, and so you need to make sure you have moves that will be effective against them and that your team is less vulnerable to their attacks. And so you want to make sure you have lots of different Pokemon, because you have your immediate team that's kind of with you, but then you have a lot of other Pokemon in storage, right? So the idea is that you got to collect them all, right? That's the slogan. And the more Pokemon you have, the more diverse you can make your teams, and the more effective you can be. So that's where the kind of collecting and team building aspects really come in. Cool. So let's take a look at Bloom, and we'll show my team. So this is a query that I built in advance. Bloom has lots of customization features that you can build in, and one of them is the ability to use search phrases. So as someone who knows Cypher, I can write these kind of more advanced queries that I know someone is going to use more frequently and put them behind a very simple search phrase. So here I've defined this query as show my team, and it calls all this information back without me having to kind of type the cipher for it every time. So what we see here, these kind of grayish brownish nodes, these are my team members. So these are specific Pokemon that I've collected and I've named and I've nurtured. We can see, for example, here we have Glurak is the name I gave them. It's a Charizard. They evolved from Charmeleon. They have evolved from Charmander. In red here are the moves that this particular Pokemon knows at this time. They're all fire moves. So there's Flamethrower, there's Fire Spin, there's Flare Blitz, and there's Blast Burn. So Charizard, if you know from the anime, from the cartoons, or from the games, is like a big dragon Pokemon, super strong with fire, and so I went all in with fire on that particular Pokemon. Let's see, I have an homage to Sparkle Horse, who's got some psychic moves. Where's my Grookey? So I'm probably dating myself here, but there was a cartoon in the 80s called Monchichi. Alex, I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I think I heard the name. It's these little black furry things. Is that what it is? I have
Mm-hmm.
something in mind, but
Exactly.
I'm not sure. Is Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah, and they look a lot like when I saw Grookey, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, it looks like a Monchichi. So I called them Monchichi. They live in trees, and yeah, I don't know. They weren't quite monkeys or primates, but they kind of look like it. But anyway, that's rather than just call him Grookey or whatever. I thought, oh,
I have a picture
I'll
here.
give him a
Let me,
clever name. Yeah, I thought maybe you could Google one and pull one up as well.
yeah, let me quickly get that in. So here we go. That's
There
how.
we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Monchichi. They were super popular when I was a kid, at least in America. But I'm dating myself. I'm a child of the '80s. So Monchichi evolved from well, he is a Rillaboom. He evolved from Thwackey, and as we saw, Thwackey can evolve from Grookey. He knows drum beating, which was a fantastic attack. Grass Pledge and Frenzy Plant, which are all grass type moves, and then he also knows False Swipe, which is a normal move. And he has the Overgrow ability. So this is how I mapped out my team. We could see that there's let's see, Gold Appleton is a dragon Pokemon. I have no, is he? Where is Pokemon Appleton? Yeah, which is dragon. So I've got a pretty good mix of moves, right? I've got some psychic, some fairy, some normal, some ground, some steel, some fire. And this is just a snapshot of my team as it was. I think this was pretty close to the end of when I was playing Pokemon. Just to give a little bit more of a tour of Bloom, if you haven't seen it before, here on the right is where I've defined some of the attributes of the graph that we're viewing. So I've given all of our nodes an icon to help us be able to visually identify them a little bit more clearly. It's quite useful, if you have business users and they're viewing complex graphs. It's nice to have everything kind of color coded and with an icon to make it a little easier to know what's going on. I've also, if we maybe expand out a little bit, I need to know Sparkle Horse is a Rapidash. If we want to know Rapidash's weaknesses, for example, I can pull back these against relationships and we start to see links between Rapidash and different Pokemon types, right? And I've also color coded those. Bloom has some data-driven styling, rule-based styling. So on the against relationships, I've defined using that multiplier weight, basically, it's a relationship weight, some color and sizing options. So basically, if you have a low, so zero is the low end of that range and 4 is the high end of that range. So I've kind of red, amber, green color coded weaknesses, and I've also made it so that the lower end, like more towards immunity or vulnerable, like having no weakness, right, is a thinner line, and then we have a thicker line at the other end. So this is also quite useful. You can do this with nodes as well as relationships, and it's a good way, again, of adding more visual information into your graph as you see it in Bloom. Whereas, I can kind of hover over each one of these and see the multiplier. I can drill into these relationships and see more detail. But just at a glance, I can see here, Rapidash, the green means better from his point of view, at least. So yellow, and then ultimately red would be more vulnerability. So it's just another way of putting more easily identifiable information right into the visualization.
That's pretty cool. Then you can, easily see and like we discussed earlier. This is then where it could be interesting to see which Pokemon is good against which other one, and then you have with the color coding, you don't even have to look at the list as much, because you see, okay, there's a thick red arrow that tells me, okay, this is this is good.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll pull back a bit more. So this is all the Pokemon that I have in my team and all their vulnerabilities. And so you can see there's only a few where it's, really, really red. So Charizard is highly vulnerable to rock. Yeah. So there's not a lot of massive vulnerabilities in my team, but the yellows represent some vulnerability, right? So I think my team is quite skewed. We can drill into a tabular view of this in a little bit. My team is quite skewed in one direction. And so if I were to go up against certain types of Pokemon, I'd need to probably modify that. I can do so you can do free text search. So here, like I said, I know that there's a Pokemon in my team called Monchichi. I can start typing. Bloom will auto suggest results for me. So it's suggested that I might be looking for this team member, Monchichi. So this is how I can start exploring the graph without needing Cypher at all, right? You can just start doing free text search. I can expand the whole graph around Monchichi and start understanding what it's directly connected to. So it's a Rillaboom. Here are the moves that I know. It has Overgrow. It has Drum Beating. I could drill into Rillaboom a little bit more. There we go. We can drill into, by double clicking, we can drill into individual nodes. You can see there's quite a few properties on this node. A lot of this is what I then expanded out into the graph, right? So here, these were all kind of columns in the CSV that show, against fire. Well, fire against this Pokemon would be double damage, grass would be half damage. And so this is what I then exploded out into the relationships to particular nodes, because this isn't a very graphy view, right? This would be a relational view where we're trying to match foreign keys and things like that, right? So this was my starting point for creating the graph. We can see this is Pokemon number 812 in our Pokedex, which is quite useful if you want to cross-reference the Pokemon DB and drill into more information. And then there's some scores around how many hit points or health points this Pokemon might have. It evolves from number 811, which is how I expanded that relationship out. There's some defense and attack scores, which basically roll up into this base total, which is kind of a proxy for the overall power of this Pokemon, right? So we have one number that represents whether this is a super powerful Pokemon or maybe a more basic Pokemon, right? So the higher this number, the better. Cool. So now let's take a look at what we're going to do is aggregate up. So for every Pokemon that I had in my team, we're going to take a look at all the against relationships, and then we're going to sum up all the multipliers by type. So this allows us to get a view of, but by all the different types of attacks, what's the aggregate of my team's multipliers. And so a lower number would mean that my team takes less damage from those types of attacks as a whole team. And a higher number means that my team on the whole is very vulnerable to these sorts of attacks. And we do this in the browser because we're getting a tabular view back. We're returning kind of columnar results, and so Bloom isn't as well suited to that because it's for graph visualization and exploration. We can see here my team in aggregate has a 10.5 total modifier for ice attacks, and so this means my team is highly vulnerable to ice attacks, right? Followed by rock also being quite high. If we look at the bottom end, you can see grass attacks. My team is very resistant to these, right? So this kind of means that my team is probably very stacked in one direction, right? So if I go up against grass or steel Pokemon, I probably have a pretty good chance of being victorious. If I go up against ice or rock Pokemon, probably less so, right? So if I wanted to balance my team a little bit, maybe explore a new area, maybe go up against a new new champion who fights with different kind of Pokemon at a different gym, then I would need to balance my team accordingly. And I don't think I copied it over as I was preparing for this, but I do have a query that can help me choose how I might add a different Pokemon into the mix here, right? So what I'm looking for are Pokemon that are resistant to rock and ice moves. So one Pokemon that's resistant to both ice and rock moves. And I had done some previous exploration before this to know that there's no Pokemon that are immune to them both, right? And then what I do is I return the Pokemon name and that base total property, which is again this kind of proxy for how powerful the Pokemon is. And what I find is these Pokemon here. So Metagross has a base stat of 700. So this Pokemon is resistant to both ice and rock, and is the most powerful one that's in the list. And so I might want to add this particular Pokemon to my roster to mix it up a little bit and to try to get rid of some of that vulnerability that I've seen to rock and ice Pokemon. Right?
So but it doesn't give you the type, right? So we could add that, right? I mean,
yeah. Or I think what I'll do now, so I can start. Where is Metagross? Maybe I don't have an index on. Querying on the fly. What I want is, what did I return? The Pokemon name. Yeah, so here's Metagross. I might, Bloom needs an index on that field to do the free text search, and I might not have applied an index to it. So we can see here's Metagross. Here's the abilities that Metagross can have. It evolves from this Pokemon. And it is, where's my, so as a bonus, it's immune to poison. Yeah.
That's handy.
Yeah, it could be. Absolutely. Cool. So I think, do we have some questions?
I can only see one from Skanda on the if Aura can handle 20,000 dB read-write requests at a time. That doesn't necessarily reflect. I mean, we talked about AuraDB freeze limitations, which are 170,000 relationships and 50,000 nodes. If you go beyond the limitations of free, you can choose professional or enterprise, and then obviously you have no limits. And but I mean, even for 50,000, you can do 20,000 dB reads and writes at a time. So it's surely possible. How are your experiences with AuraDB, Joe?
Yeah, very good. I mean, there's a lot that happens behind the covers that you don't, because it's a platform as a service, you don't really need to think about things like the clustering that happens behind it, right? Like there is a cluster that sits behind it, but you don't, because you're not administering it, you don't really need to worry so much about how that happens, right? We take care of the scalability. We take care of making sure that it's durable. If the cluster goes down, it self heals. And so all the sorts of things that you would expect from a regular operational system, you get from AuraDB. And so because Neo4j in general can handle those query loads, so can Aura, right? But without you having to necessarily worry about the cluster topology, because we take care of that for you. It might be a good time to switch over and show a little bit of information about the interface, the console for Aura, and how I set this database up.
Good idea. Yeah.
So this is my Pokemon database. You can see it's running in the free tier. This gives me some information about this particular database instance. So this is my connection URL. I can see it's running in the Europe West 1 region in Belgium. So I think this particular instance is running on Google Cloud. It's running Neo4j version 4. And again, Aura is kept up to date, without you necessarily having to worry about the details of applying patches and things like that, right? So I just know it's running version 4, the latest version that's available on Aura. I can see this has 1,971 nodes, which matches up against what I saw in the browser, and that's 4% of my 50,000 total, right? So when you're using Aura Free, this is a good way of keeping track of your usage and your caps. And again, I'm using 35% of my available relationships. There's some connection information here. So you would normally, I'm using the browser, but you can also communicate with your AuraDB instance using one of the drivers for Neo4j over the Bolt protocol. And so here are some connection details. If I was using Python, here's some code that I could use to connect, some sample code, use that to connect to my Aura instance. There's JavaScript examples, Java, and so on. You can control snapshots. So I took a backup of this database earlier this morning. I can see that this, there's a snapshot from 9:06 a.m. GMT on the 6th of December. I could restore my database from that backup. And so, again, being a complete platform as a service offering, there's options for backing up your data, for restoring your data, for managing that through this console. And then there's a few options in the setting. I could clone this database into another database, which would be quite handy if you want to iterate, maybe extend a particular copy without modifying the one that you had before. Or when I'm done with this database, I can drop the database. I can delete it here, which would be a permanent thing. You can choose to open. So this opens an automatic connection to, without having to type a URL and copy this connection URI. I can open browser and Bloom right from here. And then there's some options for importing. So I didn't use a dump file. You can see here there's some other instructions for importing. I had this database already running in Neo4j desktop locally on my laptop. And so what I did was follow these steps. There's basically a command line interface built into desktop. If you're familiar with the Linux command line, it'll feel very natural. There's this Neo4j admin tool available on desktop that comes with this push to cloud option, and I use that, which basically took my local database that was running Pokemon and pushed it into this Aura instance. So that's how I did my my data migration.
And that's very, very cool. I think that's super handy. Are you aware of any limitations? So let's say I run an old desktop database on, let's say 3.5. Would that still work, or do I need to be on 4 to, or don't you know? I mean, also,
yeah, because Aura runs version 4.
Yeah.
You couldn't push a version 3.5 database into Aura.
Okay.
So your database needs to be compatible with the 4 series, and they're migrating from 3.5 to 4.0. There's some changes that happen in the file store and so on. So I don't think there's any tooling built into Aura to handle that update for you, but there is tooling built into the Neo4j desktop edition.
Okay.
So if you do have a 3.5 or whatever version of your database, there's tools in desktop to do that upgrade for you. And then once you've done the upgrade, you can push that version 4 into AuraDB.
Okay, good. So yeah, check your versions.
Yeah, absolutely. But at this point, version 3.5 is quite old, right?
Yeah.
Version 3.5 is like a year and a half old. It's reaching the end of its long-term support window. So if you are running anything on version 3.5, I would urge you to do the upgrade, because we're almost at the point where we're going to be thinking about version 5, right?
Yeah. I mean, 4.4 just launched last week, so and I think that's going to be probably the last 4.x major release. I think so. Yeah.
Excellent. And I can see that our colleague John Kennedy has joined the conversation, and he's corrected me. So it is possible to upgrade a 3.5 version to AuraDB free, and it will update it to the latest version 4. So you don't even have to do it yourself in desktop. So thanks, John. I learned something today. Excellent.
Cool. Thank you,
That's
John.
always a
Yeah,
benefit.
that's very good to know. So that's even easier then. You don't have to
Yeah.
anything, right? So that's good. And this is very step by step, easy mode. So
Yeah. And I like desktop. I use desktop a lot as well.
Yep.
It's a good place to do your data loading and all that stuff locally, and then kind of push it to the cloud, when you're ready, and then go from there, right? It was just a nice workflow for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I had a few other queries. I mean, we can see
Yep.
this was kind of my team and its evolutions, how I evolved it. Again, I usually would start with the more basic Pokemon and evolve them myself, especially in the earlier stages of the game, before you can go out and capture these more advanced fully evolved Pokemon. So I want to say I probably sank close to 100 hours into Pokemon, which is a respectable amount.
It is. Yeah.
I was shocked and appalled, actually, because I do play a lot of Animal Crossing, and I had Animal Crossing was an absolute savior during lockdown.
Yeah.
And I was looking the other day.
Visit friends virtually.
Exactly.
You cannot do. Yeah.
Have them run to your house and have cake. And, it was really good. But I was looking the other day because I just got back into it. They just released a whole new bunch of content. There was a big drop earlier in November, and I was looking at my stats, and I've played almost 1,000 hours of Animal Crossing.
Wow.
Like 905 hours. And I asked Siri, "Hey Siri, how many days is 905 hours?" And it turns out it's almost 38 days.
Okay, yeah.
So if I played Animal Crossing straight for over a month with no sleep,
yeah,
I could achieve the same things in the last 2 years. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah. But it looks like a fun game. So and I think you can dump lots of time and effort in it. So I think it's really there's no shame in that.
No, I mean everyone needs a hobby, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fun.
No, for sure. And I get it. It's after there's nothing to do, right? And then you just spend it with something that is fun, and then you log on Friday, and then you realize, oh, it's Sunday already.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the same for me with Pokemon or any of these kind of games, right? Like I can get really into them and spend a lot of time in them, right? But it for me it always feels a little bit better, I guess, doing that than binging on program on Netflix or something like that, right? Like it feels interactive.
Yeah.
Personally, I like spending my time that way. But, and then I get to build graphs of them afterwards. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. So I think that's pretty much everything that I prepared in terms of visualization and data exploration about Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, there's because the latest Pokemon games don't create a new generation. This data is still valid. The two new Pokemon games are actually remakes of older Pokemon games, Diamond and Pearl. So actually, they only reference the first 4 generations worth of Pokemon, is my understanding.
Okay.
So it's even a little more basic than some of the stuff we looked at today.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of room, I think, for being able to explore this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it is a pretty small data set, but there's some neat stuff you could do in terms of team building, analyzing which Pokemon are the most similar to each other based on their moves. Finding communities of Pokemon that might not be obvious just by aligning their individual types and stuff. So, as I said, I think I got some of this data from Kaggle. So obviously, I'm not the only person in the world who's thinking about how to
No,
analyze these data sets and do fun stuff with them. So
definitely. By the way, did you use the data set to find a Pokemon that completes your team, and then did you add a new team member to your group for the final stretch of the game, or was it
I
something?
don't recall. I
Yeah.
mean, this was part of that whole exercise. Actually, it was this recommendation here of these particular Pokemon. But the catch is then you have to go find them, right? You have to,
Yeah.
or you have to evolve them
Yeah.
from the very beginning. So I don't know that I had these top ones, but that was kind of what I was trying to do as part of this exercise here. Was like, well, here's my team, and it's actually very weak against these classes of Pokemon. And so what can I do about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's been a while now since I played Sword and Shield, so I can't really remember how my team grew after this.
Okay. Yeah. No problem. And then I guess you'll, like you said in the beginning, you'll look forward to the new game. And with that data set, I guess even because did I understand this correctly? The new game is you can even use that data set with the new game and find out how your group is working, or if who is powerful or strong against or weak against other Pokemon.
Yeah, exactly. So because these games support generations 1 through 4, so I could, if I take out maybe. So at least as per this data set, and I'm assuming it's correct, these are the Pokemon. There's 493 Pokemon that would be available roughly in these new games because it's
Mm-hmm.
from generation 1 through 4. So I could, do the same things as I did before, and identifying which Pokemon are strong or weak against what, and build my team using the same approach, just not using all the generations of Pokemon, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's that's super good. Then it makes it even for anybody that's out now for their Christmas break playing the new Pokemon game and wants to make the perfect team. Upload that data set into your Aura free instance, and then you can uh, you know make it better.
Yeah. Endless fun, right? As if you weren't spending enough time on Pokemon already. Now you can do deep analysis,
You can
graph-based
pretend you're
analysis.
doing this for work.
I'm very lucky. I did get to do it for work.
Yeah. Yes.
And I should let me see if I can get Armstrong to come make an appearance. Armstrong, come here, buddy.
Armstrong is Joe's dog and our office mascot.
Yeah, he's
He's shy today.
my real life Pokemon. Here it comes.
No, he's
Come
not
here,
shy.
buddy.
Yeah.
Come here. Come on. So here's
Here he
Armstrong.
is.
He usually makes an appearance when I do any kind of a recording.
He's a cute little dog.
He's a good boy.
Yeah.
And he is somewhat of, as Alex was saying, an office mascot. When he's able, he loves going in to visit his friends from Neo4j, dressing up in silly outfits and going into work.
Super cool. Well, I think with that we are at the end of today's session. Anything you wanted to add, John? Joe, sorry.
No, I don't think so. This has been fun. Thank you for inviting me. I hope that this kind of lighthearted take on graphs in a different domain has been interesting for the other people who have joined. I hope it's been a useful introduction to Aura-free and Bloom. Yeah, and it's pretty easy to find me. There aren't many Joe DePos in the world. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. In fact, there were some tweets about this morning. So if anyone wants to carry on the conversation about Pokemon and graphs, I would love for people to reach out to me. I'm always happy to get into a lot more geeky detail about this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll post your Twitter handle in chat so you can follow Joe there. Thank you all for watching. I hope this was interesting and worth your time. We will be back next week. Actually, we will be back later this week on Wednesday with a special stream on improving news recommendations with Cloudflare workers and knowledge graphs from Will Lyon, our colleague. So that's happening on Wednesday. You can already set a reminder on YouTube, but we will be there Wednesday afternoon European time. And with that, thank you, Joe, again for joining today and for showing this cool pokegraph. See you next time.
See you.